Let me make a correction from last time. Remember last time we had the punishments described in the Qur'an? Well, I had how many? 5? And someone who is not here today convinced me to put another one. The one unintentional. First of all, of course, in English, unintentional homicide doesn't make any sense. It should be involuntary manslaughter. But that's not the point that I want to make. What were we discussing at that time? Anybody remember? I just told you. I'm going to sit now. Now? We were discussing what?
I mean, the case where there were explicit rules and
explicit punishment. Yes. And then the brother said, and when I allow myself to be influenced by you people, I always turn out to be wrong, like from the first day of lecture. The brother convinced me to put this one on the board. Why is this incorrect?
incorrect.
Yeah. We were describing the punishments. Yani what are the hudud punishments described in the Qur'an? Well, the brother said this one, and I unfortunately went along with him. What's wrong with it? What is the had punishment? He's saying that this is one of the ones that there's a had punishment in the Qur'an. No. What is the had punishment for this? There is no had punishment. There is kafara. Kafara is different from had. Okay. So erase that. The ones that I had, I think, are 5, and they are the correct ones. So, okay. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I'm going to stand up again. It hurts when I sit, so I prefer to. Oh, the mic? This is a real professional job here. But, okay, any questions about the Qur'an before we move on to another topic? Okay, we've finished now some aspects of the Qur'an. As I said, there's lots of other aspects that we're going to discuss, and we're going to discuss them after we discuss the Sunnah, because these aspects apply to both. Okay. Any questions about the Qur'an? About any of the aspects that we discussed, or any other aspects that might come to your mind? No questions?
How about tafsir or tafsir by Quran?
It's true, I haven't talked about it. I was going to mention last time something about the importance of proper tafsir. But with respect to usul fiqh, the aspects of tafsir, we will get to later. Which is, as I said, how to understand the words of the Qur'an, how to understand the sentences, and how to implement these commands or these sentences. Inshallah, we'll talk about that later after we finish the introduction to the Sunnah, which will take actually some time. The introduction to the Sunnah. Okay, any other questions? Right. So let's now move on, inshallah, to the Sunnah. And I have to admit that this lecture I'm giving today is not the lecture that I was planning on giving today. But due to circumstances beyond my control, I was not able to prepare a different lecture. This lecture is more from a hadith point of view than from usul al-fiqh point of view, from a hadith specialist point of view. Yes? Okay. So the first thing, as always, we have to define what's the meaning of the word sunnah. Linguistically, what's the meaning of the word sunnah? Everybody turns to it. So whenever we say, he's not here. What's the meaning of the word sunnah in English, brother? Now, road. Okay, path. Okay, is it ma'am? Way, path or way. Path or way to be false. Is it necessarily good? Okay, so it's a path or way which could be good or bad. Okay, that's the linguistic meaning. Obviously, that's not the meaning that we're interested in, but it gives you an idea of how the word developed. In other words, from usul fiqh point of view, what we'll do is we'll narrow this down to be the path of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And how can we define it? Okay, just a minute now. What does this know? Acts or sayings of the Prophet. Okay, what did you say?
Report of acts and sayings, but it's a report.
Okay. Okay, now the report of the acts and the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ is not the same thing as the Sunnah. Okay, the report or how we narrate what he did, those are called hadith. Okay, the hadith are the reports of the Sunnah, or reports regarding the Sunnah. So it's not the same thing as the Sunnah. Okay, so in other words, when you just talk about the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and specifically you're actually not talking about the report, but you're talking about actually what he did or said in this case. Let me put it this way: the Sunnah existed a long time before anyone reported about it, right? So the Sunnah is it's a different existence. Some people are scholars of Hadith and scholars of Sunnah. Some people are just scholars of Hadith. Some people are just scholars of Sunnah. Imam Malik was called Imam in Sunnah and Hadith. If you're a scholar in Hadith, it means that you're an expert at studying the different reports and verifying what are correct and what aren't correct. If you are a scholar in Sunnah, it means that you are a scholar in the actions or the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ, which means in this case actually fiqh. If you're a scholar of Sunnah, it means actually you're faqih. Comes in late with a big smile on his face. How can we get mad at him? Right? So if you're a scholar of the Sunnah, actually that means you're faqih. You can't sit here because you might be in the way of the camera when I sit. Okay. Inshallah. So, how is this? We're sticking with Khalid's definition so far. Is this good? Khalid, by the way, was not in the hadith class, so the rest of you should be embarrassed that he's coming up with this. We're all just sitting quietly. Now? Okay, so he's adding another one. Tacit approval. Okay? So you're saying it's the acts, the sayings, and tacit approval of the Prophet. Right? By the way, Saeed, this was wrong. Remember last time you said this is one of the hudud? This is... Huh? Well, I wrote it as... No. Yani it is kafara, it is not hudud. Okay. So now you all know who convinced me of it last time. Any questions about this? Everyone except this? Now remember I said that a definition, I kept stressing this, the definition should include everything that it's supposed to include and exclude everything that should be excluded, and there should not be any superfluous or extraneous materials in it. So how are we doing so far?
So it is also include tacit disapproval.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Okay, he says include tacit disapproval. Any other guesses? The opposite is, huh? He's saying tacit disapproval is part, in the definition of Sunnah. Act saying tacit approval and tacit disapproval. What is a tacit disapproval? Well, what is a tacit disapproval? And a tacit approval means what? Yeah, I know that. Tacit approval means something happens in front of you and you don't object to it. So Rahman, tell us, what is the tacit disapproval? Okay, so this doesn't seem to make much sense. Tacit, tacit is not غير صريح, but you just allow the thing to just, تقرير, the whole thing is تقرير. Tacit, you do not state, okay, for example, Khalid came late. Okay, you do not state Khalid. You do not state that Khalid came late. This is good, but at the same time, you don't say anything that this is wrong. So it means you approve of his action. Okay. Now, with respect to the Prophet ﷺ, that's true, because the Prophet ﷺ, he cannot see a munkar and not state anything about it.
The reason why it's is you can make faith and not say anything. Like some faith, you see something.
So that's not tacit. That's not tacit.
Somebody doesn't make it explicit.
Tacit means you didn't do anything.
That's implicit, I know that.
It's okay, because we're going to end up getting rid of this one also. Okay, first of all, this is now.
But Prophet doesn't act something or do something.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean it's approved?
Yes, with respect to the Prophet, yes. And if the Prophet ﷺ saw something which is wrong, it's his obligation to say this is wrong. He cannot accept it. Okay, he cannot approve of it. And that's true with respect to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Now, and if he approved it, therefore, this is circular reasoning. If he approved it, therefore, it means it must not be wrong. Any problem with this definition? Now, again, it depends actually on how we are looking at the topic. If we're looking at the topic from the point of view of a muhaddith or a scholar of hadith, scholar of hadith, okay, those of you from the hadith class, what did we say last year is the definition of sunnah from the point of view of the muhaddith. First of all, how is he looking at sunnah? It goes back, it's a little bit related to what you said about reports. How is the muhaddith looking at the sunnah? What is his way of looking at things, his point of view? What is he trying to do? Okay, that's after he collects what? Which is the sunnah. Yes. The hadith which contain what? Contains sunnah. Okay. Self-class here. Acts of the Prophet, sayings of the Prophet. Okay, tacit approval, since some people are insisting on this one. Tacit approvals of the Prophet, and what else? They are interested in anything that is related from the Prophet Muhammad. Okay, his characteristics. Both what? Both natural or physical and what? Personal. Oh, he's cheating. Shame on you now. Okay. So from the muhaddith point of view, what they're trying to look at is anything that is related from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they include all of these things as part of sunnah for their definition. Acts of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sayings of the Prophet, tacit approvals and of course tacit disapprovals. Characteristics, both natural and personal. What do we mean by this? Characteristics, both natural and personal. For example, if you have something related about how tall the Prophet ﷺ was, how did he walk, what color was his hair, what color was his beard, what kind of things, what kind of foods did he like and not like, all of these things are considered sunnah from the point of view of the muhaddithin. Okay? But now we're in a different course now, some of us. Some of us haven't graduated yet from the hadith course. We're in a different course. Now usul al-fiqh, our point is what? What are we trying to see here? What's the definition of usul al-fiqh? And we have some guests from Denver, so don't embarrass me by... Now we want to look at the sunnah from a different perspective. We want to look at the sunnah as a source of law. Okay, as the usuliyin or usul al-fiqh, we want to look at the sunnah as a source of law. So, looking at the sunnah as a source of law, this is going to affect our definition of sunnah. For example, this is not acceptable to us. Why? Because it's personal? Yes, I'm embarrassed to put it on the board. It's so personal. What do you mean by personal? Okay, so your point is, I'm going to continue your argument. I mean, this is obviously your point. Your point is that these things are not sources of law, right? In other words, just because the Prophet ﷺ had black hair, for example, doesn't mean that we should have black hair, right? So that's your point. That these things are not sources of law. So from usul al-fiqh point of view, these things cannot be considered, or we do not include it in the definition of sunnah.
How about personal? It could be something like what we discussed. It could be also something.
Actually, what? No. Okay, moral characteristics also, they will not be included as part of the sunnah, from this perspective, but from this perspective. Okay. In other words, here we're talking about specific personal characteristics which are not part of the law, which he had, which are not actually part of the law. Anyway. Anything else we should drop from here? From usul al-fiqh point of view. Okay. I say yes. It's still too general. No, tacit approval should be removed, but for a different reason. Why should tacit approval be removed? Remember, definition should include everything that needs to be included, should exclude everything that doesn't belong, and there should not be anything extraneous or superfluous or redundant. Okay, it is an act. And in not doing something is an act. So therefore, when we say acts or sayings of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, we have included everything we need. Okay. Now, most of the books of usul al-fiqh, when they define sunnah, they will include this. Okay. But it's not very good. It is an act of the Prophet ﷺ. This is one of his actions, so it's already covered. It is redundant. Yes? Not doing something is an action.
What's an action?
What's an action? It's an act. Okay, not action, act. Now we're really getting philosophical here. Even in Arabic, his tacit approval, it is a type of action. He did not show disapproval. Now, even in Arabic.
Can we replace the word act by behavior?
No.
Then this would include the tacit approval, because it's a whole behavior. But when you say act,
look, if someone does something in front of me, okay, and I do not reject it, then what have I done? I have tacitly approved it, right? That is an action. So it is acts of saying to the Prophet. Okay? And more importantly, when we get into more detail, this is really have to be considered part of the acts of the Prophet and has to be considered or dealt with as an act. Okay. So if you're like Muhammad here, you can just erase it from the definition. Instead of rewriting the definition, just erase it. Okay, what else? Still it's too general. Acts, only acts? Okay, that's too deep. We'll ignore that point for now. What else is there? Again, we're talking about it from usul al-fiqh point of view.
After the prophecy.
Okay, you're getting there.
The saying also could include personal law, isn't it?
No, I don't think so. Saying is okay.
So it shouldn't exclude the acts and saying of the Prophet before the Zulma.
Okay, and you're getting there. The acts or the sayings of the Prophet that are related to the Sharia. Okay. In particular, the acts of the Prophet ﷺ. There are many actions that he performed which are not considered part of the Sharia. Okay. In other words, and we'll discuss this in more detail later, inshallah, the actions of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, how about now? Is that okay? So here we have how the Muhaddithin, here we have, inshallah, I think the Usuliyin here, or Usul al-Fiqh point of view. And of course, this is not to be confused with how the Fuqaha or the jurists define Sunnah. Now the jurists, they're looking at something from a completely different point of view from the Usuliyin or from the Muhaddithin. They are, and if you go back to the linguistic meaning, the Sunnah means the path or the way. They are looking for the way of the Prophet ﷺ that it is good for the people to follow. Okay, and they distinguish between those actions that everyone must do, obligatory deeds, and those actions which are simply permissible to do, or those actions which are encouraged or considered preferable to do. So the jurists, they have a completely different way of looking at it. For them, Sunnah means what? In English? Huh? Good. Means, okay, not obligatory. Obligatory. That's not right. That's right. Not obligatory, but okay. Let's say more than simply permissible. I.e., recommended or preferable, that kind of thing. That's incorrect, preferable. Since I don't know how to spell it, I won't put it. Okay? Pardon? No, when they use the term sunnah, they are now talking about specific acts, regardless of. They're not talking about particular hadith; they're talking about particular acts. And the jurists, what they want to say, their goal is to say whether an act is obligatory or forbidden or permissible or disliked or sunnah. Okay. Now there's lots of other terms that they use which have a close meaning to this. Okay, but some of the fuqaha they distinguish between them. For example, mustahab or a beloved act or something. Mandub. What else? Pardon? Nafila. Right. All of these terms are pretty much similar in meaning to Sunnah. Okay? Now Naif has a handout that he's been cheating from that covers these three different ways of looking at the term Sunnah and the different meanings. Now you notice that the handout, which is from last year's Hadith class, has a mistake on it. From last year. So, but if you remember last year, my printer wasn't working properly, so there was lots of garbage on the page. This year it is clean. Can you see a copy of this? Now, what's that? Yeah, they're supposed to be like that. Yeah. Okay, if you look at the definition under legal theorists, if you look at the definition under legal theorists, you see that I included tacit approvals. Again, this doesn't need to be there. And I also did not specify that we're talking about the acts instead of saying which are related to the Sharia. For the respect of Muhaddithin, again, it doesn't matter whether the act is related to the Sharia or not. All of it they call Sunnah. Okay, so you have to distinguish the three meanings in order not to get confused. I included tacit approvals there because this idea I just got from a book from Muhammad al-Ashqar's PhD dissertation, in which he argues convincingly that there's no reason to include this. This is part of acts. So I did not correct it there. I don't want to go that far. Actually saying, because it's not to the fact that he said something that has meaning. It is the meaning of his statement. That's the important thing. So the act is the actual just speaking. But what we're interested in is what he said. So you have to distinguish between act and saying. Welcome to Philosophy 101. Right. Any questions about now just the definition of Sunnah and what in this course we are trying to get to? Okay? We're not interested in this course in just anything that is reported from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like we were in the last course. And we're not also interested in just simply what is recommended acts. We want to study the Sunnah from the point of view as what is a source of law. Okay. Any questions before we move on? Okay, what about the historical development of the place of Sunnah in Islam? Historical development of the place of Sunnah in Islam. The argument of many of the mustashriqeen, especially the older mustashriqeen, the Orientalists, the non-Muslims writing about Islam. And you should be familiar with the fact that the non-Muslims who write about Islam, they have a tendency to change their approaches sometimes. And the reason it's important sometimes to discuss their views is that unfortunately their arguments, as fallacious as they may be, sometimes we find them among the Muslims themselves. And the arguments of the mustashriqeen or the non-Muslims writing about Islam, sometimes you find Muslims themselves, they just pick up this argument, it sounds good, and therefore they repeat it. Or they try to reply to it in not a very strong manner. So some of the arguments, as I said, of the mustashriqeen, you will find them being repeated by Muslims. Their argument with respect to the Sunnah is what? Anyone have an idea? What do they claim about the Sunnah of the Prophet? Okay, they claim that it wasn't recorded in an authentic manner, but that's something we discussed in the other course. I'm now from Usul al-Fiqh point of view again. what do they say about Sunnah? Close. Now again, that's the other class. They claim that the Sunnah was not considered a source of law in the early period. Okay. They claim that it was not considered a source of law in the early period, that it became important many years later, especially during the time of Imam Shafi'i. And remember, we discussed what was Imam Shafi'i's most important arguments. And then that's related to another argument, that if it wasn't important in the early years, then no one bothered to record it. So in later years, they pretty much had to make up the hadith or the sunnah. And the two arguments are related. So they argued that in fact in the early years it was not considered important, and the Sahaba, they did not consider it important to follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The people after them, in fact, they just use sunnah meaning the way of, for example, if there's a amir or leader of Medina and he establishes a law, they will call it sunnah according to them. Okay. Any reply to that? And one of their proofs, okay, one of their proofs is that the sunnah, this term sunnah, meaning the sunnah of the Prophet, okay, meaning specifically the sunnah of the Prophet, this was a much later development. Okay, they said sunnah was a general term meaning the way people followed, and whatever the people followed was considered good, regardless of whether it came from the Prophet or not. And then some of them claimed that it was Imam Shafi'i who said, no, the sunnah has to be the sunnah of the Prophet. Okay, any response to that? Yes?
Yeah, someone saying to the Prophet.
Like what?
I don't remember the exact wording of the hadith, but he says, I recommend following the sunnah of the Rasul.
Okay, are there hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ specifically described his way as sunnah, use the word sunnah? Okay. Okay, for example, there's the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that he left us two things, and as long as we follow them, we'll never be misguided: the Qur'an, or the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and sunnati. Okay, or my sunnah. Okay, so the term sunnah referring to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ did exist at that time. The reply to that is that still, though it still wasn't being used explicitly just for the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. In other words, yes, there was some concept of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and sometimes they said sunnah of Rasulullah, but sometimes also they use sunnah for the acts of Abu Bakr or Umar and so forth. So what's the reply to that? Yeah? Yes. Yeah. What they are arguing, what Mustashriqeen are arguing, yes, you might find some reference to the Sunnah as being the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, but at the same time, it's still the Sunnah as the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ did not take on its importance until much later. Okay, as calling it the Sunnah. See, they are stressing this point. They're saying that if you look in many of the early writings, you don't find that much reference to Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, just with the term Sunnah. Okay, that's the point that they're stressing. And what's the answer to that? Wonderful point. Now, okay, you'll find a few. You'll find a few, but they say that even though you'll find a few, you'll find many where Sunnah is used in a general sense. No. Again, we're talking about now the term Sunnah and considering it the second source as using the term Sunnah. Yes. Yeah, their point is even this term saying the Sunnah of the Khulafa Rashidin, it is part of their argument that look, Sunnah means actions of anyone and anyone can be followed. Yes. So that's their point. That it's actions of anyone, and therefore it did not to become important to follow the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And the word Sunnah, if you just said Sunnah, It did not mean the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad until much later. No, that's what they're saying. They're saying even a Sunnah. Now, even a Sunnah they're saying, and they bring their evidence that it did not mean the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. Sunnah sometimes even refers to the practices of the Arabs from the time of Jahiliyyah. So what's the response?
What's their point in the first place?
What's their point? They're trying to show that the Sunnah, first of all, is not binding. First of all, the Sunnah is not binding. They like this idea. Because if you divorce the Sunnah from the Qur'an, then you leave the Qur'an open to almost any interpretation. And therefore all of these Western ideas could be put into Islam. That's the first point. Second point, they want to prove also therefore that the Sunnah wasn't preserved from the early years. And what we have as hadith is all fabrication. So Sunnah isn't the source of law, number one, and also it wasn't preserved. Okay, the answer to that is what? Huh? Ali? Okay, the answer to that is that who cares when the word Sunnah was being applied to the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad. It's not important. Okay, it's terminology. It's not important when this term specifically meant Sunnah of the Prophet. The important thing is that if we study the early years, was the Sunnah considered the source of law? And did people follow the Sunnah and put it above any other sources? That's the important thing. So in other words, again from the Mustashriqeen we have straw man argument. Remember we discussed that I think the first or second day of class. It's very important. I think I'll put it on the final. What's the meaning of a straw man argument? And they are building up a big argument here which actually has no relevance. The important thing is, what role did the Sunnah, regardless of even if they didn't even call it Sunnah, who cares? What role did it play from the early years? That's the important thing. So if we change the question and say, what role did the Sunnah play from the early years? Did it play the role as a source of law? What's the answer then? And what's the proof? Okay, the answer is yes, and what's the proof? Okay, we have verses in the Qur'an, statements of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ pointing to the importance of the Sunnah. But more importantly, we have from the time of the Sahaba. Okay, if you studied, for example, Abu Bakr, the first Khalifa, it is recorded that Abu Bakr, whenever he had to make a decision about something, what would he do? First, go to the Book of Allah. Second, okay, etc. The other part isn't important. Wa Umar, same thing. Okay, so the point is that from the beginning of Islam, the Sunnah had its place, regardless of whether they use Sunnah in a general sense or Sunnah meaning the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Over time, the Sunnah, the word Sunnah became to mean just the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. If you meant some other Sunnah, you'd have to say it. If you meant the Sunnah of Allah, you'd have to say the Sunnah of Allah. If you meant the Sunnah of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, you'd have to say it. It became to mean just the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But that is not important. The important thing is that from the beginning, the Sunnah played its role that it is still playing today. Okay. Any question about that point? And that response to the Mustashriqeen? Is that clear? Okay. Now the reason, as I said, the reason I mentioned it is because I can show you books written by Muslims that when they come to a hadith that they don't particularly want to follow, they bring up some of these arguments. Or if they want to, for example, implement a new law that, or make a new kind of ruling that doesn't seem to be consistent with the Sunnah, they start bringing these arguments, sometimes in a very small, over time. Okay. For example, some books talking about, especially written by some women from the Middle East, talking about hijab and so forth, and they try to make also this kind of argument. And the source of it is from the Mustashriqeen, or the non-Muslims writing about Islam, and the essence of it is that, in fact, their argument makes no sense. I mean, it is not a valid argument. Regardless of when the word Sunnah began to mean the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, it had always played its role as the second source of Sharia. Any questions?
I'm wondering how come some people could use this argument way that you usually destroy.
Well, when I asked you people, you didn't say anything. I mean, it's
one argument would be that there are hadith and there are ayahs that that was called sunnah or something else. Something worse. But the fact is that there is act and saying that the following the Quran says follow the hadith. So maybe you use it in a more elaborate way.
yeah, well, see, the problem is sometimes people get caught up in words. What they're trying to show, what they tried to show by bringing quotes from the early years, is that the sunnah of anybody was equal to the sunnah of the Prophet. That's what they're trying to show. If the Amir of Medina laid down a law, it was called sunnah. So they're trying to say, look, the sunnah of anyone was equal to the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Meaning the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad is no different from what any Muslim or mujtahid decides. So if anyone today wants to decide something that goes against the sunnah, that's okay, because actually this is a bid'ah, this idea of sunnah of Rasulullah. It is an innovation. Yes. Yeah, they claim. And obviously if you fall for this argument, you couldn't be true. It's like what I told you before. If you go to the Qur'an, you don't find anything, you're not a good faqih. If you fall for this argument, you cannot be.
How about if you got an example like for the details of the salah, the rak'at and this thing, what would they say in this oriental?
Actually, about those things, they don't care that much. Because their point is these things are related to worship, the ritual acts. And they don't care too much about that. Okay. Is it clear, Othman? How do they get... Like that guy who writes remember the first one you gave me? That 10-page one? He uses these kind of arguments. I mean, arguments which have no sense to them whatsoever, but people who are not trained, or people who do not read, people who just grew up as Muslim without any idea what Islam is about, they will fall for it. But no questions? Okay, now the next question is, what makes the Sunnah now a source of law? Or what is the proof that the Sunnah is a source of law? Okay. I think I'll sit down for this. And if we talked a little bit before about who rejects some aspects of the Sunnah. Historically, have there been people who reject the Sunnah as a source of law in Islam? Like whom? Okay, some of the more extreme Shia groups, they reject the Sunnah as a source of law. Why? Why do you think so?
Because they disqualified all the Sahaba except
Okay, because they do not consider the Sahaba or companions as being trustworthy or acceptable. Okay. That's one way to look at it. What is a more pessimistic way of looking at it? Pessimistic way of looking at it. No, I mean pessimistic way, and if we wanted to, for example, say something negative about the Shia, yeah. Now, because the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, as is confirmed from these Sahaba who they don't accept, and it goes clearly against what they believe. Oh, they have lots of beliefs. That's next semester, brother. Aqidah, next semester. So the only way they can avoid those, is by rejecting the Sunnah. Yes?
What do you consider for all the many interpretations within the Sunnah? What do you consider the rejection or the form of Fiqh?
No.
You define one Sunnah one way.
Yeah.
I define different. So which one do you consider both? Or either a rejection or...
No. Yani as Ibn Taymiyyah once wrote, yani there is no scholar, true scholar of Islam, who ever intentionally did not follow the Sunnah. Okay? In other words, the Sunnah exists, and we do our best to try to determine what is the Sunnah. And by our ijtihad, for example, if we do not have enough knowledge or we don't know the relevant hadith, we may come up with a conclusion that goes against the Sunnah. But obviously that wasn't our intention. So rejecting the Sunnah as a source of law is much different from coming up with a conclusion that contradicts the Sunnah. Okay, because there could be reasons or obstacles to keep you from coming up with the right conclusion. So for example, Abu Hanif or Imam Malik or Imam Shafi or Abu Hanif or Imam, what's the other one? Imam Ahmed. And all of these four madhab, you'll find opinions that go against the Sunnah. I can assure you. Okay, but it was never their intention ever to go against the Sunnah. Okay. Another group that greatly doubted the Sunnah were the Mu'tazila. And their argument about the Sunnah was what? Okay, remember we discussed the Khawarij and some of the Mu'tazila. Basically, what was their argument? In general, some of them said that they do not deny the Sunnah, but they do not believe that the Sunnah has been passed on. In other words, they are denying the authenticity of hadith. Now there's a third group, and that's of course we would study that in the other course. The third group, which would be maybe the modern day Mu'tazila or the modernists, and they do not deny, and this is much dangerous than what the old Mu'tazila used to do. Okay? They do not deny that the Sunnah has been preserved, but at the same time they feel free to reject some of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that have been confirmed. And to give one classic example that probably most of you heard before is the person who said about the hadith of the fly. The Prophet ﷺ said that if a fly enters your drink, then pour it in completely or push it in completely, because one wing of the fly has disease and the other wing has an antidote. Well, this hadith has been proven recently in England to be scientifically true. But as I mentioned earlier, with respect to rational and transmitted evidences, aqliya wa naqliya, the naqliya or the transmitted evidences, they are not in need of rational evidence to support them. In other words, it's our obligation to believe in them and to apply them as long as we can confirm that they have come from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Well, this person said, this is well known, he said that on this matter I prefer to follow a kafir doctor than follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this kind of approach to the Sunnah, as I said, it is modern day Mu'tazila, is well known. Well, if I tell you, someone might try to cut my head off tomorrow or the day after, so there's no need to. You know him? Hello. Now? But here's another one of the people who saw it with his eyes. Well, some people, when I narrate this, they claim that it is not true. The person never said it. It is well known. And this kind of modern day Mu'tazila is much worse than the older Mu'tazila. And they are neglecting really the importance of the Sunnah, that it can be derived from the Qur'an itself. Well, there's another group of people who call themselves Qur'ani people or Qur'aniyin yani. Naam? Pardon me? You want to put everyone in trouble? Some of them exist. Some of them exist in the United States. Okay, they're not very vocal. But one of the groups that believed in this before their leader claimed to be a prophet or messenger was the Bashar Khalifa's group. Okay, Rashid Khalifa, the one who came up with the miracle of 19, which is another lecture. The miracle of 19. The so-called, yeah, okay, that's much better. The so-called miracle of 19, they denied the Sunnah. Okay. Well, I went one time to one of their conventions, and I discussed with some of them. This was before he claimed to be a messenger. So I asked them some questions. For example, I said, as you pointed out earlier, I said, where do you get the salat from, the prayer? Because they're very similar to us. What do you think their answer was? Similarly to us. Thank you. You're correcting my English, right? Okay. What you, as you said, Khalid, if you're just going by the Qur'an, right, there's no way you can know how to pray in this manner. What was their answer? Yes, they said this is the prayer coming from Ibrahim, not from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the interesting thing. This means that they follow the Sunnah of Ibrahim, but they reject the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And inshallah, as we'll show shortly, that there's no way you can follow the Quran without following the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, we'll demonstrate that fact shortly. So obviously now, when you're debating with people like that, who have some doubts. Also in Malaysia, there's someone who is rejecting the Sunnah. I forget his name. Do you remember? Anyone know? Qasim, something Qasim, Ahmed Qasim or something like that.
What did he say?
Pardon me? Basically, he's just saying that the Sunnah is not something that needs to be applied. You only apply the Quran. He wrote some articles. It's now about 3 or 4 years already. And of course, these people who have these kinds of ideas are strongly supported by the non-Muslims and the mustashriqeen. Now obviously, if you're debating with these kinds of people, as I said, you cannot bring hadith in support of your argument, right? They don't support the Sunnah, so you can't bring hadith in favor of your argument. So you have to bring Qur'an. Okay? And also from usul al-fiqh point of view, it wouldn't be sufficient also, perhaps we could say this. It would not be sufficient just to bring hadith of the Prophet ﷺ until we establish what? It's authenticity, obviously, that's given.
Until we establish that it was ordered by Allah.
Now, as we said in the Hakim or the ruler, the one who lays down laws is not the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. The authority is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu or his Sunnah, his authority rests upon proof or authority from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let us inshallah discuss now from the Quran. Simply from the Quran. You wake up to bother him, and you could have stayed sleeping here. And what a magazine it is too. So what are some of the verses of the Quran that point to the hujjat or authority of the Sunnah? Don't look in the reading, Ali. Naam? Okay, this is a little test now. Now give it in English.
Whatever the Prophet brought to you, you should follow and
should take.
And whatever he ordered you not to do,
or whatever he forbids you, you should abstain from. Thank you. Okay, what's the response to that? I claim that is not a valid proof. I claim. This is really now, in English we say the devil's advocate. This is really now the devil's advocate. I guess you don't want me to bang on the table with my... Sorry, Osman.
you do proof.
Huh?
You claim something.
Yeah. Okay, what was that verse revealed about? Okay, this verse is talking about the spoils of war. Whatever the Prophet ﷺ gives you of the spoils of war, you may take. Whatever he doesn't give you of the spoils of war, you may not take. Your turn. This is a counterpoint. Your response to that, Uthman? Okay. The wording of the verse is general. There's nothing that can specify it to mean that it is simply just referring to the spoils of war. But this is the way that some of the mustashriqeen argue. They talk about proofs of the Sunnah, the authority of the Sunnah from the Qur'an, and they'll bring specific verses that they can refute, or they think they can refute. This is one of the verses they'll bring, and that's one of the ways that they're refuting. And they'll just end there, of course, leaving the person to think that, oh, well, this verse doesn't apply. But of course it does apply. The meaning is general, and it is nothing in the wording of that verse to make it mean just the spoils of war. Okay, what's another verse? The wording is general. Yeah, but the specificity of the occasion cannot narrow down the ruling if the ruling is general. And in other words, there's many verses that came down after specific occasions. Sometimes these verses came down with specific rulings. Sometimes they came down in a general way. If they came down in a general way, it means it applies to everything. Inshallah, we'll discuss that later. What's another proof of the... Okay, which verse in particular? Yeah, there's no complete verse just saying that. Okay. Right. This verse says, O you who believe, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those in authority among you. And also the rest of the verse also is the proof for the Sunnah. If you differ in anything, then refer to Allah and His Messenger. If you are truly believers in Allah and the Day of Judgment. Okay. This verse, first of all, uses the verb to obey only twice. Before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and before the Messenger. Before Ulil Amri, it doesn't say obey again. Because the obedience to the commanders or to the people in authority is subservient to the obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only says Ati Allah wa Ati Rasul, and does not repeat Ati or obey in front of the people in authority among you. Meaning that it is independent source, that you have to obey Allah and you have to obey the Messenger. While those in authority among you is conditional upon their obedience to Allah and His Messenger. And the verse continues that if there is any doubt, if you have any dispute about any matter, then you have to refer to the two sources, the Qur'an or to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which obviously means to the book of Allah, or to the Messenger, which means while he was alive means take it directly to the Messenger, and after his death means take it to what he decided. If you are truly believers in Allah and the last day. So this means that the true believers in Allah and the last day will follow Allah and the Messenger. What else? Yes. Okay, that is proof if you put it maybe with some other verse. Okay. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in many verses in the Quran, maybe 6? Nayas, how many? 6 or 7 verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about giving the messenger al-kitab wal-hikmah. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the messenger al-kitab wal-hikmah, the book and al-hikmah, wisdom. Some of the mufassireen, some of the later mufassireen, they said hikmah here means wisdom. Yani, the Prophet ﷺ was given wisdom. And he was wise. But this verse that Saeed read contradicts this. Because what does this verse say? Yes, in English, brother. In general, give us the meaning, okay? I think this okay. Okay, this was a command to whom, first of all? Okay. Now, it was a command to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ and the rest of the women to, when they're in their houses, they should remember and mention what has been given or revealed of al-kitab wal-hikmah. And here this means that al-hikmah could not be just wisdom. It is talking about something specific that they used to read over while in their houses. And as the early scholars, all of them said, Imam Shafi'i said, that all of the scholars that I know, all of the people of ilm that I know, they said that al-hikmah means the sunnah. Well, this is proof that the sunnah is a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So its authority again lies with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is an important point from the point of view of usul al-fiqh. What other verse? Okay, just a minute. This verse, in English, brother. Okay. Since you're here for less than a year, we'll excuse you. This verse says that the Prophet ﷺ does not speak from his own desires, and it is simply a revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is the response from this verse? Yes. And this verse, the second verse says, In huwa illa wahyuha. What is the dhamir or the pronoun here, huwa? It is referring to what? Okay, many of the mufassirin, they take this surah as a whole, like Fakhruddin Razi. This surah as a whole, which surah is it? An-Najm. This surah as a whole is refuting the claim of the mushrikeen, of the polytheists, that the Qur'an is not from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they say that huwa here refers to Qur'an only. And many of the mufassirin say that. Okay? Many of the other mufassirin, they say that it means that anything the Prophet ﷺ said is a revelation. It doesn't matter actually, which is correct, because we have other proof. For example, al-hikmah, we know that it's a revelation. So regardless of what huwa means here, whether it is just referring to the Qur'an. And don't argue with me about this afterwards, because this is what the mufassirin are saying, not me. I know someone after class is going to come to me and try to prove to me that huwa here means, like Abdurrahman is not here, he already tried to do it. That's why I expect someone else to come later. Okay, so regardless of whether that refers to the Qur'an only or the Qur'an and the Sunnah, it doesn't matter, because we have other proofs that the Sunnah is a revelation. Okay, what's another proof? Okay, in this verse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam to tell the people that if you truly love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you must follow me. Which means that anyone who claims to love Allah must follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Any other verses? Why don't you pass out these two? Now? But if you follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, you will be guided. Anything else? But there's some very strong. For example, this one says what? Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala swears by your Lord, which is a strong swearing. Swears by your Lord that they are not true believers until they accept the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as the decider of the affairs among them. And what about the other verse that begins مَا كَانَ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَاتٍ? This verse وَلَا مُؤْمِنَاتٍ. And this verse clearly says that it is not becoming for a believing man or a believing woman that if Allah and His Messenger or the Messenger should decide anything, that they should have any say in the matter. And whoever disobeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger has clearly gone astray. It should be two sheets. One says table 2.1, shows you what book this is from. Shows you clearly that this is from the hadith course, not from... This is part of my book. It's already typeset for the book. See, the book is 8.5 by 5. But there are a number of verses that prove the Sunnah or the place of the Sunnah in Islam. We didn't go over all of them, and inshallah we will not go over all of them. I think inshallah you can read them on your own. Now, there are some people now who go to the Qur'an and they bring some verses that prove that the Sunnah is not the source of law. There are some people who go to the Qur'an, and in the Qur'an is the ultimate source now. We have proven, or we think we have proven from the Qur'an that the Sunnah is the source of law. There are other people like these Qur'aniyin or Qur'anist people who go to the Qur'an and try to prove from the Qur'an that the Sunnah is not a source of law. And in particular, they choose two verses. What are the verses from the Qur'an that supposedly prove that the Sunnah is not a source of law? But you should know their arguments, and you should know how to respond to them, more importantly, obviously. Mukhtar, you weren't in the hadith course, so you are excused from knowing. Who read that here? Mustafa. No, that's not Mustafa. Junaid was sleeping while holding the mic that day, so we can't count. Actually, I'm just kind of stalling, giving up a sort of time to show this before we move on. Yes. Okay, yeah, go ahead. But when we say we're following the Sunnah, we're not claiming to worship the Prophet Muhammad. Although Rashid Khalifa calls us Muhammadan, saying that we worship the Prophet Muhammad, but this is okay. No. Yes. But this is not. We're not taking him very seriously here. I hope so. But what is there? Is there any verse in the Quran, for example, that gives you the idea that there's nothing besides the Quran that you need to follow? Saeed, you quoted the verse earlier. No, not today. Earlier in the class. There's no verse in the Quran, for example, that says that everything you need is in the Quran. No? Okay. And we have not left anything out of the book. If that's the case, then there's no need for the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, response. Yes? Okay. If everything is in the Quran, what do you need the Sunnah to explain it for? If everything is in the Quran,
everything in the Quran is
yes.
Has it also been accepted as recorded?
Pardon me?
Has it also been accepted as recorded to the Quran?
What do you mean?
Does it sort of like dictionary?
I don't know exactly how to answer that question. I wouldn't call it the dictionary of the Quran. Okay, like implementation and explanation. But again, the question is, if everything is in the book, nothing has been left out of the book, what do you need, Jan? First of all, what anyone know the beginning of this verse? What this verse is talking about? ما فرطنا في الكتاب من شيء. ما من دابة. نعم. Okay. The verse is actually talking about there's no creature on the earth, or there's no bird that flies with its wings, except they are or nation similar to you, and we have not left anything out of the book. Okay, this book, according to the strongest commentary, Mufassirin, this al-kitab and this book and this verse, ما فرطنا في الكتاب من شيء, it is not referring to the Qur'an. It is referring to al-Lawh al-Mahfuz, the preserved tablet. Number one. Well, even if it was referring to the Qur'an, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't leave anything out of the Qur'an, we accept that. Because it's Allah in the Qur'an who says you have to follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is part of the Qur'an. So even if it's referring to the Qur'an, which I say it's not, it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is part of not leaving anything out of the Qur'an that Allah ordered us to follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, what's another verse? Have to... Yeah. The second point, is that if this book, if nothing has been left out of this book, it doesn't mean necessarily that every point has to be included in the book, but it points to, or it commands you to, where you'll find everything. So in other words, it is the Qur'an itself, part of that book, telling us to follow the Sunnah. But what's another verse that could be used? Yeah. What are we talking about, Said? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, what's another verse that could be used as a proof that the Sunnah is not a source of law? I see you people from the Hadith class have real good memories. This was the only class that we had on the CU Boulder campus. Maybe this will spark your memory. Remember that night? In this room, inshallah, there is not many distractions. We took down the support the troops sign. Inshallah, we are in this room. Leave them, man. Because in your house, living here, your house, next door neighbor are kuffar. I hope, inshallah, it doesn't mean that the malaika aren't entering your house. طيب, هذا فقه. That's a different topic. أصول الفقه. طيب, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ تِبْيَانٍ لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Again, same kind of thing. What does the verse mean? What does the verse mean, Salman? The translation. That we have revealed the book which تبيان clarifies, let's say clarifies everything. Again, the same argument applies. It is again the Qur'an that tells us to follow the Sunnah, so therefore part of the clarification of the Qur'an is the command to follow the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now we have proven from the Qur'an itself, and we have refuted those arguments from the Qur'an that deny that the Sunnah is the source of Allah. Therefore we have to conclude that the Sunnah is the source of Allah. Now after this we could go into a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that prove that the Sunnah is the source of Allah or other things, but that is not necessary, and there is no need for us to do that, because we have already proven, and regardless of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, what the Prophet ﷺ said about his own Sunnah, we have already proven that in fact the Sunnah is the source of law. Now one thing that we want to get into, I'm not going to discuss the roles of the Prophet ﷺ with respect to the Qur'an, for example, and so on. But there's one other topic that we have to get into. We'll skip those topics again. Those were in the Hadith class, so you can ask Uthman for the tape of that lecture. I'll just mention them. The roles of the Prophet ﷺ was to interpret the Qur'an, in other words, give its proper meaning, was as an independent source of law, was as a model of behavior, and as a recipient of obedience. But the next point that we have to discuss, maybe I'll just mention it, and inshallah we'll discuss it next time, because I'm very happy to let you go early today. Is given that the Sunnah is the source of law, as proven by the Qur'an, is it the case that the Qur'an and Sunnah are to be taken equally, or is the Qur'an given preference over the Sunnah, or is the Sunnah given preference over the Qur'an? No? You're saying they complement each other, which means what? They are equal, and you could have complementary things, but one is superior to the other. So Muslim is trying to avoid the question. Now? But that's the second question now. Thank you, Ahmed. Is there some Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that there's no source for it in the Quran? Oh, we know what madhab he belongs to, and could possibly contradict the Quran. And inshallah we'll take up those questions next time.